Now to transfer all of the pin markings with thread, and then to change the pattern to reflect the changes. I will be marking the hemline that I pinned up in the front, the side seams that are taken in, the waistband that needs to be taken in, and the back darts. I'm using a long stitch with my basting thread and following the fold that I pinned up across the bottom hem in the front. To be able to see clearly and work with this waistband, I want to transfer my markings so that the waistband is flat, not folded at the top of the dart. And the complete take-in on either side is 1/2 inch. So right now I'm just putting 2 pins to mark the 1/2 inch on either side of the back waistband. I'm measuring from the bottom of the waistband to the bottom of the new dart in the back. And I want to go ahead and mark my pattern, change the markings on the pattern to reflect this new dart. So right down the center of the dart, I'm marking the length. And also the width at the top of the new dart. This is correction tape. If you don't have correction tape to block out the old lines, just put little crosses around them or over them so that you're sure you know which line you'll actually be sewing on. Marking the notches at the top of the dart in the seam allowance, and writing the amount to be taken in. and repeating the same process on the other back piece. And now to address the side seams. I know that from the hem up to a few inches below the waistline, it is taken in 1/4 of an inch on the fold. So I'm starting by measuring how far down from the waistband the part that I'm taking in starts. It's a little less than 5 inches. So that's where I start my thread, and it will blend into 1/4 of an inch from there down to the hem and into the hem. If the seams on either side are taken in the same amount as this one is, in other words, I'm not taking more from the front or the back, then when the seam is facing you and you're holding it vertically, there will be a left and right side on either side of the seam. Use your thread tracing down the right side. That way, when you flip the garment inside out to sew it, the side that will be up under the sewing machine is the one with the thread tracing. And I'm only going through the top layer of fabric. I'm trying not to sew into the seam allowance. To take in the side seams and to adjust the hemline in the front, I have to open up the hem and the back part of the pleat, the backing has to come out, at least in the hem area. I'm measuring 1/2 of an inch over from center back on the waistband because that's how much is actually taken in. Those 2 pin markings above the darts reflect a 1/2 inch take in, so I need to take it in from the center back. And the same thing on the other side, which we will call the underlap side. So where the zipper meets the waistband, I need to mark over 1/2 inch so that I will have taken it in on both sides equally. And now to open the back of the waistband so I can take the darts in, the side seams, as well as the waistband. Now I need to change the pattern, so I'm double checking the measurement from the top of the skirt to where I have started the new side seam. In other words, the original side seam is right correct from the waist to about 5 inches down, and then it starts to come in to that 1/4 inch on the fold. Marking where I will transition from the original side seam into the new one, and marking the 1/4 inch a little below the hip. So I will start the transition the 5 inches from the waist down. Crossing out the old seam allowance. Now, the easiest way to change all of the side seams on the pattern is to stack them carefully and trim them together. So on the front, I folded it and put a straight pin through the hip line and waistline to make sure it doesn't shift. Secure it down with a few more pins. And stack the back pieces with the front. This paper I can easily see through, but if you're using paper you can't, then of course the correctly marked seam needs to be on top. And this back piece is corrected to reflect the new side seam. Once they're stacked, I can trim off the excess and they will all be the same. It also allowed me to see a few little discrepancies in the hem area and trim the excess off. Remarking the side seam for clarity. Marking a new notch. Marking a new hem notch. Before you trim, make sure that the layers of paper are pinned securely so that they don't shift. Transferring the hip notches through all layers. The hem notches. And marking the seam allowance inside the seam allowance area. And now to change the waistband, it's taken in 1/2 of an inch on either side of center back. So I need to mark that and add new notches where appropriate at center back and any seam allowances. And also I'll put one on the fold of the fabric, which is also the fold of the waistband. Using correction tape to cover up the old markings, establishing my new center back, a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So now I have an extension and seam allowance. Notching the seam allowance. New center back notches. Line to mark center back. Correction tape along the old center back line. Marking 1/2 inch seam allowance, which also creates a nice extension, and notches at the top of the seam allowance, at the fold line, and notches could also be put at the center back. Certainly, I will address that issue when I start to sew the waistband onto the skirt. And now to press the side seams flat so that they sew easily when I go to take the garment in. And I will sew the new seam before removing the old seam. The old seam will stabilize the 2 layers of fabric, holding them in place, which will also help keep the check in place. After I've sewn the new side seam, then I will take out the old seam. And pressing along this new line that I've marked, it looks to me like the initial pressing, it kind of slipped below the check. So I'm just pressing this really well so I can use it as my guideline for the hem. And now to sew the skirt.